Around 300,000 years ago, your ancestors were walking around completely naked. No shoes, no coats, no fabric of any kind, and for a long time, that was fine. They were born into a warm climate. They had each other. They survived. Then something changed. And the answer to what changed and why they finally decided to cover themselves is one of the strangest detective stories in the history of science, because it has nothing to do with what you think. Ask anyone why humans started wearing clothes and they'll give you the same answer. Cold. You moved north. The winters got brutal. You needed something to survive. It makes perfect sense. It's also almost certainly wrong, or at the very least, it's only a fraction of the real story. Here's the problem. Homo sapiens have existed for roughly 300,000 years. For most of that time, we weren't anywhere near the cold. We were in Africa, under the sun, in one of the warmest environments on the planet, and the evidence strongly suggests that clothing didn't start when humans migrated north into the freezing dark. It started long before that, in Africa, where it was already warm enough to survive without it. So the cold theory immediately falls apart. Because if warmth was the only need clothing met, nobody in Africa should have bothered, and yet they did. Which brings us to the strangest piece of evidence anyone has ever used to date the origin of human clothing: lice. Specifically, the difference between two types of lice that live on your body. Head lice live in your hair. They've been with humans for millions of years. They need hair to survive. But body lice are different. Body lice live in clothing. They can't survive without fabric. They lay their eggs in the seams of garments. Remove the clothes and the body lice die, which means body lice could not have existed before clothing did. So in 2003, a team of researchers at the Max Planck Institute led by Mark Stoneking had an idea. If they could figure out when body lice split off from head lice as a separate species, they could pinpoint exactly when clothing first appeared, because the moment body lice evolved, their own distinct lineage was the moment humans gave them fabric to live in. It was the moment clothing was born, and what they found was startling. Body lice split from head lice approximately 170,000 years ago. Not 30,000, not 50,000, 170,000 years ago, in Africa, during a warm period, long before humans pushed into the cold climates of Europe or Asia, which meant that whatever made humans reach for clothing the first time, it was not the temperature outside. So what was it? 170,000 years ago is a specific and interesting moment in human history. The planet was going through something unusual. There was a glacial period, even in Africa, not Arctic cold, but noticeably colder and drier than usual. Food was harder to find, resources were shrinking, and the human population, based on genetic evidence, may have dropped to dangerously low numbers. Some estimates suggest as few as 10,000 individuals were left on the entire planet. That's not many, that's nearly gone. And in that moment of pressure, of scarcity, of survival, something cognitive also began to shift. This period overlaps almost exactly with some of the earliest evidence of abstract thinking in humans. Shell beads used as jewelry, ochre pigment used for decoration, the earliest hints that humans were not just surviving but expressing something, saying something about who they were, and clothing from the beginning may have been part of that. Not warmth, identity. The oldest sewing needle ever found was discovered in the Denisova Cave in Siberia. It is roughly 50,000 years old. It is made from bird bone. It is small, precise, and extraordinarily well crafted, and it was made not by Homo sapiens. It was made by the Denisovans, a separate human species we only discovered existed in 2010, a species we know almost nothing about, and yet they were sitting in a cave in Siberia 50,000 years ago crafting needles fine enough to sew tailored clothing, not draped animal skins, not loosely tied furs, tailored clothing, shaped to fit a body, which is a completely different technology. Shaped clothing traps air close to the skin. It insulates in a way that a draped skin never can. And many researchers believe that this specific invention, fitted clothing made with a needle, was one of the key reasons Homo sapiens was able to push into the extreme cold of northern Eurasia, while Neanderthals, who had been living there for hundreds of thousands of years, eventually disappeared. Not because we were smarter in every way, but because we were better dressed. Then there is Ötzi. In 1991, two hikers in the Alps on the border between Austria and Italy stumbled across a frozen body emerging from a melting glacier. It turned out to be 5,300 years old, the best preserved ancient human ever found. And what scientists noticed almost immediately, alongside everything else, was his clothing. Ötzi was not wearing rough, primitive scraps. He was wearing a coat made of at least 4 different animal skins, stitched together with careful seams, leggings made of goat leather, shoes constructed from bear hide on the soles, deer leather on the top, and stuffed with grass for insulation, a grass cloak worn over everything. And some of his clothing showed signs of repair, patches sewn over worn sections, old seams restitched, which means clothing was already precious enough, already valued enough that you did not throw it away when it wore down. You fixed it. 5,300 years ago, a man crossing a mountain pass in winter was wearing something he cared about. But here's the part that changes how you think about all of this. Clothing is the only thing humans wear that no other animal does. Birds have feathers. Bears have fur. Every other creature on this planet is already wearing what it needs. Only humans looked at their own body and decided it needed to be covered. And not just covered, decorated, communicated through. Because almost from the beginning, clothing was never purely functional. The shell beads, the ochre, the careful stitching on Ötzi's coat. These were not the choices of an animal trying to stay warm. These were the choices of a creature trying to say something about their group, about their status, about who they were. Anthropologists who study the few remaining communities that have historically worn minimal clothing notice something consistent. Even in climates where clothing is not needed for warmth, humans decorate their bodies. The impulse to signal identity through appearance seems to predate the impulse to stay warm, which means clothing may have begun not as a tool against the cold, but as a tool against anonymity, a way of saying, I am not just anyone, I am this. Think about what that actually means. Every other adaptation in the animal kingdom happens to a species. Fur grows thicker because the ones without thick fur died. Skin darkens because the ones with lighter skin burned. Evolution happens to animals without their input, but clothing is different. Clothing is something humans chose. The first person who wrapped an animal skin around their shoulders and kept it there made a decision about their own body, about how they moved through the world. And in doing so, they did something no other creature in the 4 billion year history of life on this planet had ever done. They edited themselves. Today you make that decision every morning without thinking about it. You reach into a wardrobe and you choose. And in that choice, whether you realize it or not, you are doing something that began 170,000 years ago in a warming Africa with a group of humans who had no needle, no loom, no fabric, just an animal skin, and something that felt important enough to keep. The cold came later. The fashion came later. But the impulse, the need to cover yourself and say something about who you are in the process, that was always the point. That was always what it was for. And if you want proof that it was never really about the temperature, look at what humans do the moment they have enough warmth, enough safety, enough comfort. They don't stop thinking about what they wear, they think about it more. Ötzi was crossing a mountain in winter when he died. He was dressed for survival, but his coat was still made of 4 carefully selected animal skins, still stitched with care, still repaired when it wore out. 5,300 years ago, a man trying to stay alive in an alpine winter still found it worth the effort to make something that lasted. Something worth fixing, something worth keeping. Maybe that was always the real reason. Not because we were cold, but because we were the only creature that ever decided what it looked like mattered.